Joining me now, Ahilan Kadirgama, a Tamil from Sri Lanka who's working for reconciliation with the majority Sinhalese population. Also, the Sri Lankan ambassador to the United Nations, Palita Kahona, who's in Copenhagen for the climate change conference there. And here in our studio, the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief, Sir John Holmes. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being on this broadcast. Ambassador Kahona, can you tell us exactly what took so long and what is taking so long releasing all these tens of thousands of people from the internment camps?
For one thing, it's not been that long. It's only 6 months since the war ended, and in May we had over 300,000 people pouring into these camps, which were run by the government in order to feed the people, provide them with shelter, and to provide them with health care. The children were even provided educational facilities. Now, almost 60% or maybe even 70% of them have returned to their own homes. At the end of last week, there were only about 114,000 still remain in the camps.
Ambassador?
And the government had told the rest that
Ambassador, why was there no independent access? Why weren't people allowed to come and monitor the conditions in the camp?
In fact, from the 1st of December, the inhabitants of these camps were told that they could go. Most of them refused to go, instead decided to stay on because they knew where the food was, they knew where the shelter was, and where the medical facilities were.
Right.
But we hope that eventually all of them will return to their homes.
Well, let me ask you, Sir John, in charge of humanitarian affairs, what is the status there, and is this something that troubles the UN?
Well, we were very frustrated for the first few months after the end of the hostilities, because although it was legitimate to have the people in camps because they needed assistance and that's where they had to go in order to receive that assistance, they were not being allowed freedom of movement. They were kept in the camps. And also the release process.
Why?
Well, because I think there were security concerns which the government had. We didn't accept that they had to that extent those security concerns. We have made some recent progress. People have been given more freedom of movement from the 1st of December, and the process of releases has started. But it was a very slow process and very frustrating for us.
And was there adequate access to those people? Did you have access while they were in the camps over the last 7 months?
I visited the camps 3 times myself. There were times when the access wasn't quite as good as we would have wanted, but from the beginning, the UN and most of the NGOs did have that sort of access, so we could keep a track, and we were, of course, part of the assistance program to the people.
Well, then, are you satisfied with the way the government treated all those people in the camps, and why is there allegations of human rights abuses?
Well, it wasn't perfect, but I think the main problem was a lack of freedom of movement. And we've seen some real improvements in the last few weeks. As I say, we were very critical for a while, we were very frustrated. Now there's been progress, now people are going home. As the ambassador says, probably everybody should be out by the end of January, and they have freedom of movement. And that's a critical point, that we didn't want to be involved in helping internment camps as opposed to normal IDP camps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ahilan Kadirgama in London, you are trying to work for reconciliation and rights for all sides. How do you think this is going to happen now? It's now 6 or 7 months since the Tamil Tigers were defeated. Is there any sense that you can move forward on the reconciliation front?
Yes, I think the biggest issue all along, despite those people having suffered so much throughout the war, even the last 6 months is lost time. The process of reconciliation should have started long back. And it's not only the freedom of movement issue, that was the critical issue over the last 6 months, but the political climate has to change in the country. The North has remained very much militarized, and we can't move on reconciliation unless there is a credible political process, unless there is further resettlement of the people in their own homes. The political concerns, the economic concerns, all of them have to come together if that community is to feel they are part of Sri Lanka, and that they feel that they are being treated as equal citizens in the country.
Ambassador Kahona, do you accept that there needs to be political reconciliation? And if so, how do you answer Ahilan Kadirgama?
That's the priority for the government. It is a critical goal for the government to engage in a process of reconciliation, reconstruction and rehabilitation. This is now taking place. The government is talking to almost all the Tamil parties in the country, including the TNA, Tamil National Alliance, which was formerly the mouthpiece of the LTTE. The government has had elections in almost all the provinces, including the Tamil provinces, the east and the north. There will be a general election early next year. The political process is already on train, okay. And we hope that people like Mr. Kadirgam will recognize that and engage in the process rather than be critical from a distance.
Let me ask you this, since we're talking also about the last weeks of the fighting. Obviously there was a lot of killing going on, particularly in the last weeks of the fighting. The official figure from your point of view, from the government point of view, is 7,000 Tamils were killed during the fighting, but that doesn't take into account the last weeks. And there have been many accusations of heavy firepower directed at civilians in the Tamil areas. How do you answer that? And why was there a need to train your guns on the civilians there?
The government denied that then, and it continues to deny that. The government had a policy of not attacking civilian concentrations, unlike the LTTE, which relied on bombing civilians at every opportunity it could. So I don't think this figure is accurate. In fact, the United Nations, which apparently compiled this figure, later on said that these figures were not verified on the ground.
Well, let me ask Sir John Holmes.
In the circumstances...
Let me ask Sir John Holmes. There are obviously huge allegations about the force that the government employed to crush the Tamil Tigers. What are you saying? The ambassador's denying that there were 7,000 or more deaths.
We always said that we didn't know exactly how many people had been killed. 7,000 was an internal estimate. The number may be lower, it may be higher. What is clear is the civilian casualties were unacceptably high. The problem was the LTT were holding the civilian population that were living with them effectively hostage. They were using them as human shields.
These are the Tamil
These
rebels.
Are the Tamil, the 300,000 Tamils who were with the LTTE. So the government had a real problem, which we need to accept, of actually dealing with the military side of the LTT without causing civilian casualties. Now, we don't think they did enough. We encouraged them not to use heavy weapons, and we believe they still were using heavy weapons, but both sides, were committing violations, and we suspect that. There needs to be some inquiry into that, some accountability about that, and that's what we've encouraged the government to do.
And there was shelling of hospitals and other such areas, church?
Well, what you had, especially in the last few weeks and months, was, as I say, a very, very heavy concentration of the civilians, 300,000 being kept there against their will by the LTT, and a battle going on right in their midst. So it's not surprising there were civilian casualties, and that's why it was so important to respect the humanitarian principles in dealing with this.
Now, can I ask you, Ambassador Kohana, because we're going to talk about the political process when we come back from a break, but first of all, there are obviously, the fact is that the leaders of the Tamil Tigers were gunned down. They were trying to surrender. There's all sorts of accounts of how they were told to hoist the white flags, and they were machine gunned to death as they came to surrender. Why?
This is just an allegation which popped up very recently, not at the time. And the government has categorically said that this scenario never occurred. In fact, General Fonseca, who's running for the presidency, has recently said that he would not believe that his own troops would have done anything of the sort.
How were their bodies were found riddled with bullets, no?
When you're caught up in a firefight and you are the one engaged in the firefight, it's quite likely that you get shot.
Can I ask you, Sir John, there were reports of a journalist, a British journalist, Marie Colvin, being called by the Tamil Tigers and relaying messages to the UN about surrender conditions. Do you confirm that?
Yeah, there were definitely contacts with the senior officials in the UN Secretariat about some leaders coming out with white flags, and we relayed those messages on to the contacts we had. What we don't know is what happened then. I mean, there are these allegations. We simply don't know whether they're true. Again, it's another good reason for actually going for some kind of accountability process to prove the truth of these allegations or not.
And why did the UN official there at the time not go and monitor the surrender?
Well, we would have liked to do that, and we offered to do that, but it wasn't possible in the very confused circumstances. This was the last 24 hours of the conflict, and it happened very fast, and before anything else could happen, the conflict had ended and they were dead.
Because the written article suggests that the UN official, Mr. Vijay Nambiar, said that he didn't need to go there.
Well, it wasn't possible to go. Fighting was going on there and we weren't being allowed in. So I don't think that could have happened in the circumstances. He was in New York at the time.